Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
I didn't know he was going to stop there. Because Clancy has a few other cute tricks. My name is Milfred, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here tonight. For a while, I thought I wasn't going to make it. And I must say it's the only time that I've been at a conference where I was slated to speak at all 4 meetings, got to speak at only one. And if you think you're in control of the way things work, let me tell you what happened to me yesterday at O'Hare. We were late getting away from Toronto International because of ice. On the way, they assured us there would be no problem because all the planes in Chicago were on hold as well. So as we were getting to Chicago, the flight attendant announced that the flight to Kansas City was going to be at gate K2. So I got off the plane, and they said there will be flight attendants there who will help you get where it is that you're going. So I was beetling off to K2 when somebody stopped me and said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to the flight to Kansas City, to K2. She looked down her list and she said, "Oh, no." She said, "You're supposed to go to K18. I said, "But they said in the plane that it was K2. She said, "No, it's K18. And once more, because I was so sure I was supposed to go to K2, I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "Madam, do you want me to write it on a piece of paper for you?" So I went to K18. I get to K18 and the lady says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I want to go to Kansas City." Well, she said, "The flight doesn't leave till 6:35. I said, "Is that the only flight?" She looked in the computer and she said, "No, there's one at gate K2. She said, "I think it's boarding." So she called. Yeah, the flight was still there. She said, "Run. I'll tell them there's a runner on the way." So if you want to see O.J. Simpson going down the aisles of O'Hare, that's what I did. Got there, and the flight had just taken off. Now, do you think you're in control? So, you know, when you think about how this whole weekend evolved, I don't understand it. I don't think the committee really understands it. You don't understand it, but obviously there was a plan at work which I don't understand, but it's all right. Because I think that's often the way things are in life. We think that we're setting a course, and things happen. And I just had to say to myself, I don't understand this, but so be it. Whatever way it's going to be, it's going to be. As it turns out, when I got here, somebody in the elevator told me that I had given a wonderful talk last night. So, here I am taking Gary's place. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me. And it's wonderful to see Elmer and Marie, whom I've already met before. And, of course, it's wonderful to see Dick and all the new friends that I've met. You're wonderful people here. You know, sometimes one goes to a conference and people are very shy and reticent, and unless you talk to them, they don't really talk to you. I don't know. I think a couple of hundred of you have talked to me, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that and how good it's made me feel. It's absolutely wonderful. The story is told of this lady who was driving up to a parking spot in her Rolls Royce. And she was just getting positioned to back the thing into place when behind her came a young fellow in a small little car, and he whipped into the parking spot. And as he did, he rolled down the window and he said to her, see what you can do when you're young and quick. And with that, he got out of the car and he walked off. And as he was walking away, he heard crash. And he heard the motor rev and a backing up, and he heard the motor revving and another crash. And he looked around, and there she was backing into his car, and it was sitting there in rubble. He walked back to the scene of this disaster. She rolled down her window and she said to him, "See what you can do when you're old and rich." Now, what does that mean? I haven't got a clue, except I like to laugh, and obviously you like to laugh too, so that's why I told you. I do know what I'm here for. You always get into trouble if you forget what you're here for, like the man who went to his service meeting one night and the speaker had not arrived. And so his buddy said to him, "We'd like you to speak." And since he knew a few raunchy stories, and since it was all his men friends, he thought, okay, and he chose as his subject sex. He gave his talk, and it was well received, and he was feeling kind of high that night when he went home. But things weren't all that good with Katie. So when he opened the door, he was still feeling good, and he said, "You know, they asked me to speak tonight." And she he thought, what can I tell her? Things aren't good between us. I don't want to tell her that I spoke on the subject of sex. She said, "What did you talk about?" He said, "Well, I talked about horseback riding." There was not much said that night, and they went to bed, and next day, Katie is at the supermarket. And the neighbor lady comes around one of the aisles, and she says, "Say, I hear that Simon gave a fantastic talk last night." And Katie said, "Yeah." She said, "I don't know why he would choose the subject he chose." She said, "It's a subject about which I think he knows practically nothing." She said, "To the best of my knowledge, he's only done it twice in his life." The first time he tried, he fell off. The second time he tried it, the filly kicked him off and he broke his leg. My subject is not sex, and it's not horseback riding, and it's not your alcoholism, and it's not theories of alcoholism. It is what alcoholism did in my life and how the program works in my life. And that's really all I'm here to talk about. I'm not here to tell you how you should run your life. I'm just here to share with you. If you pick nothing up, that's fine with me. If you can pick something up that's useful to you and will help you get around the next corner, that's fantastic. That's what it's all about. And I'm sure from all the young faces that I see in the crowd, there are lots of new people here. If you should not happen to like what I say, don't let what I say send you away. Come back. I guarantee you that someday somebody will stand at this podium, somebody that you can identify with, and somebody whose message may be more compatible with how you see the world. I'm indeed grateful that I'm alive. I'm glad to be sober, and I'm really proud to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you think that that qualifies me for the funny farm, I'm here to assure you that I'm no stranger to funny farms. Having been incarcerated at one or the other across this continent at least 29 times that I know. By the way, I'm a nut. You were appropriately attired this afternoon, for those of you that were at the skit. Sometimes for 5 days and for periods ranging up to 5 months. While I was there, they gave me many kinds of treatment, including drugs, and at one time I had 25 electroshock treatments, and I'll tell you, that'll put quite a buzz into you. They diagnosed me as being a schizophrenic. They said I was schizoid paranoid. Another doctor said I was paranoid schizoid. Somebody else said I was manic. Somebody else said I was depressed. Another said I was manic depressive manic, and another said I was manic depressive depressed. So by the time somebody said, "We think you're an alcoholic," that was very good news indeed. The way I came to Alcoholics Anonymous reminds me of the story that Dave Allen, the Irish comedian, tells about the drunk in Ireland who was going home through the graveyard, and it was raining and it was slippery, and he fell into a newly dug grave. He tried to claw his way out, but the more he tried, he kept slipping back down, and finally, in desperation, he said, "I'm just going to sit in the corner and I'll get out in the morning." And he kind of dozed, and he was muttering to himself, and he kind of fell asleep, when a second drunk came along, and he too fell into the grave. And he too tried to claw his way out 2 or 3 times, at which point the drunk in the corner realized what was happening, and he kind of opened an eye, and he pulled himself to his feet, and he tapped drunk number 2 on the shoulder. And he said, "You're not going to get out of here." He did. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the first time in 1966, and I was delighted to be here, and it was wonderful for 3 weeks. I was in a wonderful pink cloud, and at the end of that 3 weeks, approximately, the pink cloud opened up and dropped me back to the earth, and the bill collectors found me, and my unruly emotions found me. I had no idea how to live. I was most uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do with myself. I'm an alcoholic, but I liked being in AA. I had had some experience with drugs, so rather than pick up a drink, and I didn't feel inclined to drink, I went back to taking drugs. I sat in Alcoholics Anonymous for 5.5 years, stoned out of my ever-loving mind. And I thank God for the good people in AA who, though they knew that I was not doing what I ought to be doing, externally, sure, I was coming to meetings. I was talking at meetings. I was going out to the women's jail. I was in Prince Albert at the time, and I'm sure many of you know Cease. And he let me go out there every week, every Tuesday. I would trot myself out to the jail, probably carrying the disease rather than the message. But anyway, I went, and I stayed sober like this. I stayed dry for 5.5 years. It's not to be recommended, and I don't need to tell you that I drank again. And why did I drink again? Well, for I think a number of reasons. One, I didn't know how to deal with pain. Today, I'm not afraid of pain, because I know what to do with pain, and I know what pain is. It's not the message of an angry God who's punishing me or trying to teach me. Pain is a result of things that I have done that put me out of harmony with the universe, the breaking of the principles of the program, and things like that that bring me to a state where I'm out of harmony, and then I suffer, and when I suffer, I know that it's not the world, it's not other people, it's not events, and it's not circumstances. It is myself that has to change, and when I do change, voila, the pain is gone. I can suffer a little time, or I can suffer a lot of time. I know today that it's not the things that happen to me, it's what I do with the things that happen to me. It's the attitudes that I take toward who is around me and what is around me. I remember when I first came back to the fellowship in 1973, we had a fellow named Moose who used to come to the meeting, and I didn't understand what he said, what he meant, but I heard what he said. He said, "It's not important what you think of me." He said, "What is important is what I think of you." And of course, what he was saying is, it's not the outside that really can do anything to help me or to harm me. It's what I harbor inside, and I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. My emotions were running riot. I was a typical example of self-will run riot. The book describes me in various places. I wanted an easier, softer way, and for me, a few sleeping pills now and again, a few being 5 a night maybe, a few uppers, and that kind of thing. That was my easier, softer way, and I can tell you today, I don't believe in easier, softer ways that are not the direct, hard way, because the direct, the most honest, the hardest way right off, that is, in fact, the easier, softer way. If there's a problem in my life, I'm going to have to deal with it. And by trying to evade it, by all the kinds of stuff that I used to do, I'm still going to face the problem. And so I know that now. I didn't know that then. And I had no idea how the world works. So you can see that not having done what the big book tells me to do, to be rigorously honest, to go all the way, not to seek the easier, soft way and so on, I didn't change inside. That's the magic. I don't care whether you're in AA or you're outside AA or you're Al-Anon or you're somebody who's never taken a drink too much or whatever, where you may be in this universe. Change is the name of the game. Nothing stays static. And so I'm either, if I'm going to, in that process of being alive, I'm either getting better or I'm deteriorating. And so the program has offered me the way of changing in a positive way. And I can do that any day that I am living and breathing. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I must tell you that I was born on a farm in Saskatchewan. I didn't like the farm. I didn't like Saskatchewan. I was a Roman Catholic, and I didn't like that. I was the youngest of 10 children. I thought that was obscene. I was German, and that was not a popular thing to be in those days. And I was a girl, obviously, and I didn't like that. I can tell you that when I hear people talk about their happy childhoods, I can't identify with that. I was an oddball, and the only life that I've ever known is the life that I have experienced in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's why I am very grateful. This program is a way of life, and it has given me everything that I have today and everything that I am. And therefore, I really feel that this is my way of life, and I'm very grateful that I was able to come into this fellowship and find this way of life. I no longer feel that I'm a victim. I no longer feel that I'm an oddball. I no longer feel that there are no answers. This book tells me there is a solution. Lack of power, that was my dilemma. And I don't have to be without power anymore. I can get my foot off the hose at any point where I want to take the tools, put them into practice. It's not so important what gets said here. It's not important what gets said at discussion meetings. It's important what I do with what I hear. What's on these pages is wonderful, but if I read these pages and I can even internalize them. And you know, I believe in another big book, it talks about being able to speak with the tongues of men and of angels. And if I don't do anything about what's in the book, it's not going to help me. So I didn't have any reasons. You know, when I look at it, I hear children who are beaten. I teach disturbed adolescence, and I suppose there's a divine irony in that. And I had a good childhood. My father, by the time I came along, was a wealthy man, and I didn't have to work the way my brothers and sisters did, and my brothers and sisters used to say, "You're so lucky." And I just shut them out because they didn't understand me and I didn't understand them. It was as if there was a thick wall of glass around me, and I tried to get out for a while, and when I couldn't get out, I just put a smile on my face. There was no smile in the eyes, but there was a smile on my face, and I just stopped trying to communicate the despair that I felt inside. You know, and I don't really care about the whys and wherefores of that. The fact is, that is the way it was. I'm not stretching a point when I tell you I really never felt happy. By the time I was 16, if you had told me that I had cancer, I would have been delighted. That's how mentally ill I was. Instead, I went to a convent. Not a smart thing to do when you don't like girls, when you don't like being regimented, when you don't like anything, really. I didn't feel comfortable anywhere in the world. And people say, well, why would you go to a convent? I guess it was my way of making a bargain with God. I'll do the hardest thing that I can think of, God, and then you fix me. And I really expected God was going to fix me. Instead, I, by this time, had a severe drinking problem. I was drunk the night I entered, which I'm not proud of, but it's the truth. And I tippy-toed around those convent corridors, stoned right out of my mind, and drunk sometimes for about the last 8 years that I was in the convent. If you think that keeping your drunkenness from a wife or a husband is a problem, you try keeping it from a Mother Superior. You know, the amazing thing to me in all that time is that nobody ever said to me, do you drink too much? I didn't know if I drank too much. I knew I wasn't supposed to drink, but I just felt so miserable. And I can tell you right now, I'm glad I'm an alcoholic. It's the best deal I've ever had. I could have cancer. I could have multiple sclerosis. I could have a host of other diseases that it wouldn't be as simple to do something about. The book tells me I have a daily reprieve. Isn't that wonderful? I wonder if you went into the cancer wards of this city. I just buried 2 friends this past week who died of cancer, and a third one is dying of cancer. And, if you took the big book and said to them, I have a daily reprieve for you dependent on your spiritual condition. You do a few things, and you can live and die from something else. You don't have to die from the terminal illness from which you suffer. Wouldn't that be marvelous? Wouldn't that be fantastic? And yet that's the offer that's made to us through this program. So I left the convent January the 10th, 1966. I wasn't thrown out. And I won't go into a big, long story about the convent because that isn't really what I want to talk about, except to say that after 15 years in a convent, spending 6 hours a day in spiritual exercises of one kind or another, I say they were spiritual, at least on the outside. For example, we used to get up at 5:30 in the morning to begin our monastic routine. I used to get up at 4:45 in the morning to begin my alcoholic routine, which was either to get into the pills or the booze, so by the time we went down to sing matins and lauds, I was feeling very spiritual, so spiritual I just felt I could levitate right over the heads of the nuns. I fancied that someday I would be canonized indeed. So I remember standing on the convent steps January the 10th, 1966, and I really thought all my problems were over. I figured that now, and so had Mother Superior. She said, you're young enough, sister. She said, you can make a life for yourself. And she said, I don't think you're happy here. What she didn't understand and what I didn't understand really was that there wasn't a place on the face of the earth that I was happy, and that you could have said to me, if you could have said to me, map out what you want in life and I have the power to give it to you, I could not have told you. Because you see, at that time, my whole efforts were directed toward the outside. I didn't know that you have to fix the inside and the outside will take care of itself. If you are sick inside and you fix the outside, the problem will spring up somewhere else. I'm sure we all have seen that happen. You marry one person and it doesn't work out and you think he's your problem, and you marry one that's worse than the first one, but it isn't really that he's worse, it's that your disease has grown worse. I went completely to hell in the next 10 months. I couldn't find my place in the universe. I didn't fit anywhere. And it wasn't because I'd been in the convent that long. I just didn't fit. And I think sometimes in our disease of alcoholism, we have to get worse before we get better. And that's what was happening to me. I found a place where I did fit. It was down at the bars. I started out drinking with what I considered lower companions, and I became the lower companion. And when the rounders at the bar don't want you to call them, you're in trouble. I found myself locked up in jail. Now, that may not impress you, but I can tell you it impressed me mightily. And at the end of that period, I went back to the prairies to another psychiatric ward, and it was there that I met the man who was to become my husband. It will not surprise you to know that he was a psychiatrist. Phil P. from California describes it thus. He says, their neuroses were complementary. The rocks in his head fit the holes in hers. He was not too tightly wrapped. I was not too tightly wrapped. If you can think of a more bizarre couple than a drunken ex-nun and a drunken psychiatrist, I do believe you've got a long way to go. However, I want to emphasize he was not my problem. I drew to me the kind of person that I could form this parasitic relationship with. And I think that, whenever these relationships take place, I really do believe there's something in it for each partner. I needed his prestige. He needed my youth. I was 18 years younger than he was. So we each got something out of that relationship. And it lasted for a little while. Anyway, I drank again. And I thought the first time that I got sober, I thought my nose was rubbed as low in the dirt as it could be. I had no idea where bottom was, because I'll tell you, the second time, in 1973, that was a bottom that I hadn't even envisioned, because by the time we were finished, the sheriff put the doors, the key locks on the door. I had my belongings in 2 bags, and I went off to a treatment center. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Again, sometimes I guess people are curious, they wonder, did you drink every day? What did you drink? How did you drink? I was a pig drinker. I would drink as much and as long and as often as the booze held out. I would either pass out, or the booze would run out, or somebody would carry me away. Those were my only reasons for stopping drinking. I often went to work drunk. One school that I taught at, I was met one morning by the principal, who said, I have no idea what I did. I used to get these terrible blackouts. I have no idea what I did. He said, you have 10 minutes, get your things. And he said, I want you out of the school, I want you off the property, and I don't want you ever to contact anybody from this building again. No idea what I did. And I was too chicken to find out. I'd be kind of curious to know now if I had fun, at least. But I'll tell you, there were times in my life, as I said, I'm glad I'm an alcoholic, because the way I felt about life, alcohol was the only thing that really was a viable alternative. It could do for me what therapy couldn't do, what hours of therapy couldn't do, what gifts, what material things. There was nothing that could do for me what alcohol could do in about 10 or 15 minutes. I felt like a mensch. I felt I was okay. The problem was I felt so okay, I wanted to feel better, and then I would drink more, and then would come all the disasters that followed. How much did I drink? Sometimes I'd get drunk on very little, and there were days when I drank 52 ounces of hard liquor plus other stuff, and I'd still be on my feet. It was as if there was a demon inside me that wouldn't be quieted. I'm so glad for this program, because that's all gone now. The demons are gone because the program has given me the tools to deal with them. I'll tell you one weird story, and then I'll get off the subject of drinking. One time, When I think about this, I can't believe I was this crazy. My husband was gone, and at that time we had a housekeeper, and the housekeeper was gone. And so I never found it necessary to take booze up to the bedroom. And this night, about 3 in the morning, I wake up and the wind has slammed the door shut, and as it slammed the door shut, something happened to the knob and I couldn't get out. And I'm in need of a drink. Well, there was nobody else in the house, and I was too embarrassed to phone anybody at 3 o'clock in the morning and say I need to come over and bring me a drink. So I looked out the window, and the window was about 1.5 stories up, and I thought, well, I'm going to go out the window. So I did, only to break my fall. I thought that's quite a ways down. You can see I really wasn't too compos mentis. I threw a chair out, and I thought I'll jump on the chair. Thank goodness the chair landed far away, and I landed up. Of course, I was so almost going into DTs. I realized when I got down that I didn't have any way of getting into the house. So we had a little stable on the property, and I had seen the week before an ox goad that had been left there. It was a great big long piece of heavy wood tipped with steel. I weighed about 85 pounds at the time, and there I am in my baby dolls with this ox goad taking flying leaps at the back door. If that doesn't qualify me for insanity, I don't know what does. Finally, I realized I wasn't going to do it, so I got a rock, pounded in the window, opened the door, went down to the bar, had some booze, called the police, because I had to account for all this nonsense that I had just accomplished, called them and told them that an intruder had been there. When they came, I said, "You will smell booze on my breath." I said I was so shaken I just had a few drinks. And they patrolled the road for 3 days and nights, so the bad guy wouldn't come back and get me. I've had DTs, and I've had convulsions, and I've had blackouts, terrible blackouts. And that's really all I can tell you about my drinking, except to tell you that I drank long and I drank hard. I can't say that I had a good time drinking. If that's what you call a good time, God help us all. It just did the job. It eased the pain that I felt inside. And it eased it until I could find a way of life that would do the job far better than alcohol ever did, without leaving any of those terrible consequences. So, one morning, I woke up in a psych ward, which won't surprise you, and I had a spiritual awakening, and I can't call it anything else, because I woke up one person, and by lunchtime I was a completely different person. And the person that started to develop started that morning. Now, I don't know how you got sober, but this is exactly how it happened to me. I had an understanding that morning of what was wrong with me. I'd always known that I was crazy. I was empty spiritually, mentally, in every way. You know, being able to go and get degrees, that's no sign of anything other than that you've got a few smarts, but it doesn't mean you've got any wisdom or any sense about how to live your life, which I didn't have. That morning, I knew what was wrong with me. For starters, it was alcohol and drugs that were killing me. I wasn't getting a chance to develop. And I knew that if I had a chance at all, I wasn't just too sure how much of a chance I had, but I knew that if I had a chance, it was going to have to be cold sober. And so I made a decision that morning. And it was a decision that I would call surrender. And surrender is different from compliance, because surrender is not something that has anything to do with you. Surrender is an internal thing. And I think with any problem that I have today, If I'm going to deal with the problem, the first thing I've got to do is surrender to the fact that I have the problem and that I of myself can't handle it. Then I'm teachable. Then I'm in a position where I can learn something and where I can find out how, in fact, I may handle that problem. And so I really surrendered to the fact I can't drink anymore. And I know we say, one day at a time. True, I can only live well, that's not even true. I can only live 1 second at a time. But, I think it's like this. I'm committed to sobriety the way I'm committed to breathing. And I can't breathe today for tomorrow. I can only breathe this breath right now. And so that's the way I feel about I'm committed to sobriety. I am not planning to get drunk tomorrow. And I hear people say, I tell myself this is just for today. Maybe tomorrow I'll drink. I can't do that. I've got to think in my head, this is my way of life, and I've got to build my way of life around this. And for me, drinking is no longer a choice. It's no longer a viable alternative to what I have. And should you ever hear that I got drunk, you will know that I am stark, raving crazy. Not the way Clancy says I'm a half-crazed ex-nun, but really that I'm stark, raving crazy. Because with the life that I have today, if I should ever pick up a drink and say, well, maybe this time it's going to be different, or today this is going to solve my problem, I have got to have rocks in my head that aren't going to fit into somebody else's. So, I think for everybody it's a different thing. For me it was the fact that we were bankrupt. And I don't know why that morning it was perfectly clear to me we were bankrupt. And we were indeed. The big house on the hill and all that foolishness didn't mean a thing. We didn't have any money, and I felt that I couldn't look after myself. I think there's a bottom line for everybody, and for me this was it. I can't look after myself. And my husband can't look after me. What am I going to do? Am I going to go home and beg? Am I going to live on the streets? Am I going to live on welfare? And I knew that I hadn't been raised for any way of life like that. And the whole thing was comprised of all that stuff. And I determined that I was going to stay sober, and I lost the compulsion to drink that moment, and I have never had it back. And my freedom from the compulsion to drink was this. It was that strong, it just ceased to exist. I went home, and my husband one day handed me a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. I understood after a while it was laced with vodka. Normally, I love fresh squeezed orange juice. And normally, I would have just picked it up and just taken it down, and that day I smelled it. And it didn't smell right, and I found out after a while it was indeed laced. And I think that's not an uncommon thing. He was not a bad man. But I think he also sensed that something had changed in me and that he had lost his drinking partner. And he had lost me as a victim, because once I got sober, I was no longer going to be party to what the kind of life that we had been living up to this time. I think, that's really all that was involved with that. I went through a treatment center, and I'm not recommending that as a way to go. We have it's a hospital really in Toronto called Donwood, because I would not go to AA. I was mad at God. I was mad at AA. They hadn't cured me. So why would I come back to you? You hadn't fixed me the first time. Why would you fix me the second time? So treatment center, I hadn't been through that one, so I thought I'll give them a try and see what they can do. I went through there, and I stayed with them for about 6 months. I went to aftercare meetings there and so on. But eventually, I couldn't cope with the way things were. I had learned a few things. For example, I'd gone back to my psychiatrist telling him that I was going to commit suicide. And I expected that we were going to have another long psychoanalytic session. He said, sit down. And I sat down, and he said, you want to commit suicide? And I said, yes. He said, well, if that's what you want to do, he said, for God's sake, get on with it. He said, I'm sick of your belly aching. Make a choice and get on with it. He said, if you want to get well, on the other hand, he said, I'll help you. And that was the end of the interview. I got his message. So eventually, I walked back to the doors of AA. My first year in sobriety, I can sum up, it was distinguished, I think, by poverty. It was distinguished by joy, such as I had never known, and it was distinguished by a few tough decisions that I had never made, the kind of things that I'd never done before. We were so poor that sometimes we didn't have enough to eat. But on the other hand, I can remember sitting on the subway in Toronto, going to my job, which was answering a telephone, and with the tears streaming down my cheeks because I was feeling such an incredible sense of joy. You see, when we take the foot off the hose, life starts to exert itself. And, you know, if you're new, don't expect that everything's going to get okay. You know, it takes a long time to grow an oak tree, and we have all kinds of habits, and we have all kinds of patterns, and we have all kinds of bad relationships. That doesn't change just like that. It takes time. But I was starting to experience the joy of living, despite that poverty. Tough decisions, I'd always made decisions, if you can call them decisions, according to my feelings. And I'll tell you the tough decision, and because it's Kansas City, I'll say this. We had gotten a beautiful little dog, a Boston Bull, from a kennel in Kansas City. And both my husband and I loved that dog, just, I think, as much as we could have loved children. Dogs love you unconditionally. And in our last days of drinking, those little dogs, we got the one and then we got another, so we had two of them, and those animals, they you could see in their faces a reflection of what we were, but nevertheless they loved us. And the day came when I could have them put to sleep, because we didn't have any money. We didn't have enough money to feed ourselves, let alone look after dogs. We had moved to Toronto. We didn't know anybody there, and I didn't want the dogs to be abused. And it broke my heart the day I went to the kennel, and I wrote the note saying, because the lady, I guess, sensed that we were having trouble, and she said, I'll have them put to sleep for you. And I could hear them whimpering downstairs, and to this day I feel that they sensed my presence in that room. And I had to leave that letter there, and I knew that the next morning she was taking them. And it was the first decision that I had ever made. It tore the heart out of me, but I made it. I went and I did for a change what I had to do. And I think I started to grow up. And after about 6 months, I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't come here for the spiritual part of the program, and I didn't come here because I believed in you. I came here simply because you were nice to me. We had no money. We had no friends. Some people live on Skid Row when they're drinking. I lived on Skid Row when I quit drinking. I didn't know there were places like this. I survived it, and I'm glad I had the experience, because I can tell you I found out who I was, and I found out what life is really all about, and it is not about fine clothes and positions and money and external things. It's about something far deeper than all those things put together. And so I came back to AA. I think that getting sober was an event, but coming to AA and whatever has happened to me here has been a process. And a process doesn't happen all at once. It's a succession of things, one thing that builds on another. And I think the first thing that I started to experience here was sharing. And I think the sharing in the fellowship is so important, because it's no longer therapy. You know, to me, therapy is sort of a vertical relationship. The therapist sits up here in all his or her godlike authority and importance and says, thou shalt do such and such, and if you do such and such, you'll be so-and-so, and you go away and you say, they don't understand me. And then you come to AA, and it's a horizontal relationship. And people look at you eyeball to eyeball, and they share with you, and they tell you what happened to them, and you know what happened. The barriers drop. And I could no more say to people in AA, you don't understand me, I'm different, I'm unique, because they were telling my story, they were talking about my feelings. I used to think that I was the only person in the world who'd really ever suffered this terrible depression. I used to think that I was really quite a special soul. As a matter of fact, once a Monsignor told me that he thought maybe I had been put on the universe to be nailed to the cross with Jesus Christ. Even I, dedicated sufferer that I was, couldn't handle that one. I think the second thing that I experienced was the fellowship, the fun of being here. You know, it says in the big book, we must have a good time. I mean, how is the newcomer what is going to draw the newcomer here? You know, if I come to the door, and that was one of the things that drew me, I saw people who seemed to have what it was I wanted, and I'm not talking clothes and finery. I'm talking about there was a peace on their face. There was a kindness. There was a gentleness about them. And they were having fun. They were telling jokes and they were kidding each other, and there was me. Grim, as my sponsor said, you're grim, you're boring, and he said, in fact, I think you like suffering. Who likes to be told you're grim and you're boring and you like suffering? But he was right. I didn't know how to laugh. I didn't know how to have fun. And that's why today when I can tell you something and you laugh, it does my heart good, because it tells me something about myself. I'm no longer quite as much in the doldrums. You know, I never had a holiday, for example. After I was sober, I never had a holiday till about 8 years ago. And a friend and I went on a trip to Mexico. And I can tell you that if I'd have been alone, I would have come back the next day. Because I got up and I didn't know what to do with myself. Like I had gone to work. I knew how to get up and work long days and run choirs and be an organist in a church and go to university and teach school and be busy, busy, busy. I didn't know what to do. Get up in the morning and not have a place to go. So for me, that was a real learning experience. As it's turned out, I've learned to love to travel and have had a good time traveling to Russia and to Southeast Asia and Italy and France and various places. I'm making up for all the years that I didn't go now. And it's wonderful, and it's one of the gifts that the fellowship has brought to me. So that was part of it, the fellowship and the talking to people, and how much I've learned through hearing people tell me things, and it's helped me get out of my shell. And you know, I often say this, I'm really glad and grateful for the older members who keep coming back to meetings. Where would we be without them? You know, in our group, in my group, I belong to the Don Mills group in Toronto. And the Don Mills group is about 170 people. And we give a lot of one-year medallions. We give fewer 5. We give fewer 10. We give practically no 15s, and we give very few 20s. And, you know, I wonder where are the people. And I don't say this in criticism. I mean, it's up to each of us to do what we feel we need to do. But I can tell you I'm glad for every older member that was there when I came in the door. Where would I be if they hadn't been there? And so now the least that I can do is to be here. Well, when I got here, they told me that I need to practice the program. And I'd say to people, well, what does the program mean? And they'd say, well, you know, you do the steps. And I could just never get a handle on this till one of my friends said to me, you know, in chapter 5 it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And that's what clued me in. This is a path to freedom. That's what this program is all about. I can have the shackles that bound me to alcoholism cut if I will do certain things. And it's quite simple to me now. It is indeed the steps, the traditions, going to meetings, the concepts, the legacies. Those are indeed the things that bind me and keep me on this path to freedom, because freedom is what it's all about. And I can tell you, in my opinion, if I don't feel free today, I have really not been practicing this program. And I think it really all began for me with the steps. Not talking about the steps, not analyzing the steps, not discussing the steps, but doing the steps. And my sponsor said to me, if you are going to be my sponsee, you are going to do the steps. And so we went through the steps. And to me, what the steps did for me, they put some fact into my life. They gave me a sense of reality. You know, I do believe today that we don't need to learn a whole lot of new stuff. I think that we already know everything that we have to know. That's not what we've been told. And I think that we already are everything that we ever can be because the Spirit lives within us. It's not a question of becoming more than we are. We already are that. We already know everything. It's shedding a lot of the old stuff, and that to me is what the steps really are all about. The big book says it another way. Lack of power, that was my dilemma. You see, I think we all know that we need a center. And if we haven't found the center where the Spirit lives within us, we build one up, and we puff it up, and we call it ego, and we call it self, and we fill it, and we puff that little ego up with money, and property, and prestige, and power, and titles, and cars, and whatever else turns us on, and makes us feel worthwhile, and makes us feel that we are somebody. And because it's all false, it leaves us feeling empty. And that's where our lack of power, it won't stand up under any kind of pressure. And that's what has to be done away with. And that, to me, is what the steps are all about. And if you're new and you're sitting here and you're suffering, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that if you will do the steps, in whatever capacity you are able to do them, you will feel better, bit by bit. Strip by strip, you will get to where step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And it all ties together, doesn't it? Because on many places, the big book says, there is a solution. And it tells us specifically what the solution is. I have a daily reprieve dependent on my spiritual condition. In another place it says there are days when the alcoholic has no mental defense against the first drink. And the only defense can come from the fact of my trying to maintain a spiritual condition. That does not mean being perfect. I don't think there is such a thing. It doesn't mean always just being wonderful, trying my best. I think what it means is doing the best that I can on a situation-by-situation basis. And sometimes, you ever get a day like that where it just seems the more you try, the worse things go? What do you do at the end of one of those? I know what I do. The worse it gets, I go to bed and sleep. You know something? By morning, because I have learned the problem is not out there. The problem is always me. And when I think that I should be perfect and that I should have my act together, I'm kidding myself. Because I've learned that there are things in me that I don't even know. I'm almost 17 years sober now, and I know that still there are depths in me. Things come up that I didn't know. For example, last summer, I was involved in a business deal, and through that, I found levels of fear in myself that I didn't even know existed. And one day I was saying this to this man I was doing business with, and he said to me, and he's not in the program, he said to me, you know, as far as I'm concerned, fear is an escape from responsibility. He said, if you say you're afraid, that makes it all right then not to do what you really ought to do. And I don't know if that twigs you, but it sure twigged me. And I went home, and I took another whole look at this whole issue of fear. And I'm sure that as I live down the road, there are going to be other things that come up that are equally devastating and that are down there. And you know something? I believe there are some things that are so deeply programmed in me that I can't even really do anything about them. I think I've got a very simple way of looking at it today. The only thing that I can do is the event that I have right now. I can't even live a day at a time. The only moment that I've got is the one I've got right now standing here before you. I haven't got another thing to do in the world right now but to give of the best that I have to you here in Kansas City this night. And when this is finished, then I go on to the next event and the next event. And if I build this one well, I'm building a bridge that I'm going to walk on to the next event. And we keep on building our bridges. I used to think maybe there was such a thing as, I don't know, I sort of thought there should be some way you get it all finished so you know. I like nice, tidy endings. I don't like strings hanging down. But, you know, I can live with imperfection today. I can live with things not finished. And I think that as you grow, you realize this is the nature of life. Life is not tidy. Things don't get finished in life. And there are all kinds of strings hanging down, and once in a while somebody pulls on those strings and you find things in here. I have found something that helps me immensely, and that is sitting in the silence. You know, I've been trained, God knows, about prayer and meditation and all that kind of stuff. I've been so busy all my life yapping to God, telling him how to run the world and telling him who he should favor and who he should give it to, and saying, go and fetch, as if he were one great cosmic bellboy with the key to all the men's warehouse. It's time that I have a new car, God, deliver it, and then being angry when it didn't happen. And you know, did you ever notice those words that we use? We say, it will be so, God willing. How about it will be so, me willing? God is always willing to give me good. He's always willing to give you good. Good is the nature of God. As Barbara said this morning, God doesn't forgive. He doesn't have to forgive. God always loves me. I think that if, you know, in the big book it says, either God is or he isn't. And if he is, then he's everything. And if he is all that is, then I think that our little shenanigans and our little negative programming, I think somewhere in the Bible it says, you know, the eyes of God are too pure to behold iniquity. I think he's just so much above all this pettiness. And I think for me, I think it's not learning more, and it's not getting more, it's getting rid of the old programming to understand that I am okay today. I don't have to be anything other than I am today to be pleasing in the sight of God, because I believe that all bad things come from ignorance. If people know better, they do better. And as you learn more and as you feel better about yourself, you do better things. And that's why the secret is to do the steps in whatever elementary, rudimentary fashion you can do them. I think 1, 2, and 3 are simple. I've had sponsees who've said to me, I can't do the steps. And I've said, why? Because I'm hurting so. Well, I said, what do you think then? What are you going to do? Come to meetings? And is there going to be some magic dust that's going to rub off on you? And then you're going to feel better? And then you're going to do the steps when you feel better? Or are you going to do the steps in order that you can feel better? And I think it's the latter, of course. In 1, 2, and 3, I just come to terms with my situation. You know, and I still don't like the word God because it has a lot of connotations for me. I like the word spirit, power greater than myself. I love that. I can handle. Step 3 I thought I couldn't do because I'd get into all my theology and philosophy. Till my sponsor said to me, you know, look at the first 3 words. That's the operative part of that step. You make a decision what to do, to change. And how am I going to change? I'm going to do 4 and 5, which enable me to come to terms with myself. 6 and 7, which tell me how I relate to God, not God who's going to take away my defects of character. As my sponsor said, dummy, because I used to say to him, well, I wonder when God is going to remove my defects of character. And he would say, dummy, stop saying that. He'll take them away when you stop doing them. Then 8 and 9, I had to make my peace with others, and I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness. But anyway, I got to the end of 8 and 9, and still didn't have it all together. And you see, I thought that if I got the first 9 steps done, that somehow or other the whole process should be finished. And instead what I found, I was still depressed, I was still angry. That's when the real work began. The first 9 steps did exactly what they should do for me. They cleared away the wreckage of the past completely. But they cleared it away, but the programming, the memories, the habits, all that stuff is still there, and that's what has to be dealt with. Mac Cheater was still living at this time, and I said to Mac one time when he came to Toronto, Mac, because Mac, if you knew Mac, you knew what a beautiful man he was. You felt better for being in his presence. He just had something beautiful about him. And I know what it was. He allowed the Spirit to flow through him. And I said to Mac, because I thought, now, if Mac would just tell me what he reads, and if Mac would just tell me what he does and how he orders his life, I will do what Mac does, and I'll be a little Maquette, and I'll be just like him. So I said to Mac, I want to know what you do. He said, I do steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. I said, yes, Mac, I know. But tell me what you really do. He said, I do steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, and that's all he would tell me. And I understood about a year ago. I knew what he was saying. That is really what I had been trying to do, because I wanted to be well so desperately. I have tried to change my relationship to myself and like myself, change my relationship to God, and change my relationship to others in the world. And isn't that step 10, 11, and 12? I used to look at step 10, and I thought at first that all it meant was, I take a look at my day and see if I hurt anybody. Well, that's okay. And I used to think, too, that these were maintenance steps. God help me if all I had done was maintain what I had when I was a year and a half sober, when I had finished these steps. To me, it seems now that 10, 11, and 12, they really form the fabric of anything that I do in pursuing a spiritual way of life. And I don't think the 3 are separated, because I think how I think about myself in relationship to the power greater than myself determines how I feel about myself. And how I feel about myself determines how I feel about others. And the 3 are vitally related to each other. You can't do one and not do the other. Can you imagine doing prayer and meditation and then not having any carryover to how you feel about yourself or to how you feel about others? My test of my meditation is, what do I do to my fellow man on a daily basis? How do I relate to the world in general? And if you don't see any change in my character and in the way I deal with you over a period of time, then I think that my meditation is an absolute illusion. It's a false something that I'm creating. And if I don't feel better about myself, I don't know what it's all about either. I used to think that I had so many false ideas. I could just talk about nothing else but all the false ideas I had. I used to think that my first responsibility was to love you. And I hated you. I hated people. I didn't know that, and I wouldn't have admitted it. took me a long time to admit that I had many walls up against other people. What did the great teacher tell us? He said, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That's pretty explicit, and it's very plain. You can't love me more than you love yourself, and other people can't love you more than you love yourself. And God knows we all want a relationship, hopefully a meaningful one with a soulmate, but anyone will do. How many people haven't said, God, I need a relationship? And we focus we focus on a relationship when I think what we need to focus on is loving ourselves. And when I love myself, love will come my way in whatever form that be. I don't ultimately need to have a sexual or whatever kind of relationship. What I do need to do is to love myself. And in the process of loving myself, I will love others, and that will be my love for God. And then it's all okay. You know, I think we have so many false ideas about this thing of relationships. One of mine was that 1 + 1, you know, the old marriage ceremony, which said, these two shall be as one. Nobody would ever tell me which one they were going to be. Being a woman, I was sure I knew which one it was going to be. But I think that that's a problem that I have to leave, I don't know, it reminds me of something I read about how the scientists catch monkeys in the South American jungles. What they have learned is that there are certain sweet-smelling nuts that the monkeys like. And so rather... Perhaps that tells me more about you than it tells me... about the monkeys. Anyway, there are sweet-smelling nuts they like, and they take jars, heavy jars, with long, narrow necks. And the monkeys come, and because they like these nuts, they put their paws and their arms and they grab onto these nuts, and because they've got a fistful of them, they can't get their fists and their arms out, and they can't be free. So the scientists come back, and there are the monkeys tied to their jar with the sweet-smelling nuts. And that's how they catch them. And I think often that's why I have problems, because I'm attached to the problem. And when I really surrender to the problem, then I'm in a position to walk free and to find my answers and to do something about what it is. There's one thing I just want to talk a little bit about, and then I will close so we can get on with the other unspeakable things that will go on tonight. See, I did not leave the convent too late. And that's the subject of forgiveness. My life has changed very dramatically in the last 4 years, for the good. And I think that it changed for the good in the last 4 years because of something that I learned through forgiveness. And I think that through lack of forgiveness of something, I had my foot on the hose. God is always willing to give me good. It's me who puts my foot on the hose when I am not willing to forgive my fellow man, because basically I think we're all one. And when I won't forgive you, I'm really not forgiving myself. And isn't that's what the great teacher taught us in that beautiful prayer, the Our Father? Forgive us as we forgive others. One night I went to a dinner party with my friend, my gentleman friend, and it was a couple that had invited us. And I'm going to just tell you the incident because you see just how how stupid this thing was, and how it really almost blew me away. There sat my friend, here was I, there was the other man, and there was my friend, his wife. And I realized in hindsight, I went there and I was needy. And I'm going to tell you something, when you're needy, you're vulnerable. You're in a dangerous position. You're asking for it. And somebody's going to get you. And what happened that night was, those two men talked business. And I'm sitting there feeling my self-esteem going right down the dumper. And all the old messages are playing loud and long. See, men talk business. They don't talk to me about business because I'm a woman. I'm nothing, I'm nobody, and so on and on and on. And then Myrna brought out the dessert, and she served us each dessert, and then she served my friend a second dessert, and then she offered him a third dessert, and I hadn't been offered a second one. Oh, by this time, I'm devastated. We go sit in front of the fire, and the other gentleman comes and talks to me. What does he talk to me about? How are your friends doing? How are the students in school? How, we talk about AA. And I'm thinking, yeah, when they talk business, fine, that's for men. And when it's all these little human issues, then a woman is good enough for all this silly stuff. And by this time, the tears were rolling down my cheeks. And Kevin said, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." You ever try that little routine? If nothing else will bring them to heal, that will bring them to heal very quickly. Well, we went home, and this festered in me. And I settled on Kevin. And I really had a real hate going for Kevin. I really felt, when I look back, I can see it so clearly. It wasn't what had happened. It was the old messages in me that made me hurtable. You can't hurt me if I'm not hurtable. If I feel that the Spirit lives within me, and therefore I am complete, and I'm okay, and I'm a growing being, and I'm all right, even if I make a mistake, you can't hurt me. When I'm hurtable, which I was that night, and I got hurt, then came the bitterness, came the anger, came the resentment. Now, I know what the great teacher said, and I believe what he said. If you are at the altar and there you remember that your brother has anything against you, not even that you're mad at him, but that there is disharmony between the two of you because he is angry at you, go first. And go try and make peace with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Well, I tried to forgive. And I would sit in prayer and meditation, and I would forgive, and I would think it was all over, and then one day something would bring it right back. It could be a smell, it could be a word, it could be something that would bring it all back. And I for a while, I thought, what's wrong with me? Am I not sincere? But you know something? I don't think it was lack of sincerity. I think that is what the process of forgiveness is. It has to be not just, I forgive you for what you did. That's the surface of it. What it has to be is a healing inside me. And the healing inside me that I have come to believe in is the one that comes from sitting in the silence. As I said, I used to yap to God. Now I try and sit and listen. Because there are things in me that need to be healed. And that's what I needed at the time. And you know something? It took me about a year, almost 2 years, until I reached the point where I knew that the bonds had been cut, that I was free. And then I could write Kevin a letter because they had moved out of the country by this time, and I could explain to him that he had really done nothing to me, that it was because I had been hurtable, and that some of these old messages had to be healed in me. And you know something? They're my best friends today. And as a result of that, something has changed in me. Something has shifted. It's an attitude to the world, and I can only tell you that good has poured in. good in my career, good in my professional life, good with my friends, just everything, and above all, peace of mind. I really like myself today, and I'm really pleased with the way things are going in my life. And I know that I haven't got it all made, but that's what we're all here for, on a continuing basis to do the best we can. When we make our mistakes, it's no big deal. Like, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad decision. You just make the decisions that you can. If they don't turn out, you make other decisions and get on with life. Life is too short to sit there full of self-pity and worrying. Get on with it. And in closing, I would like to just recount to you what I think is really what life is really all about. It's finding out that we really are the manifestations of the Spirit. And once you know that, you become much less hurtable. The great teacher, I think, told the story, and I can't put it any better than he did. He said there was a man who had 2 sons, and he was a very rich man. And these sons lived in the lap of luxury. And one day, one of them, he got kind of tired of all this. And he thought maybe he'd have a better time if he went somewhere else. So he asked his father for his inheritance. I suspect he was an alcoholic, and he went to a far country, and he caroused until he had wasted all his inheritance, and he found himself eating with the pigs. And he said to himself, you know, my father's servants are better treated than this. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to ask my father to forgive me, and I'm going to ask my father if I can be a servant. I'm not even going to ask to be in the household as a son. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to ask to be a servant. Well, he never got to do that, because as he was coming down the road, his father saw him when he was yet a long way off. And he went in, the father did, and he said to the servants, get the gold ring. And he said, get out the finest robes and kill the fatted calf, because this my son is come home. And they partied, because the son had come home. And I think that every day that any one of us decides we're going to live a little closer to our true nature, I think the Father indeed is pulling out the fatted calf and the fine robe and the gold ring for our fingers and is saying, this my child is come home. I wish for you all God's blessings, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for having me here tonight.